Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 77. I'm your host, Joe Hannon. Thanks for tuning in these past couple weeks. It's been some interesting programming maybe for you guys. Maybe you're tired of hearing about my various ailments. I'm tired of talking about them. But I will say that, generally speaking, I'm still feeling better. Still about 7 pounds underweight where I should be. But the tension has broken a little bit. This competition and the illness coinciding forced sort of a hard reset. And that's kind of what I'm going to get into in this episode, which I think I'm going to call Retreat. It's odd that the tension has broken because the real fight is coming. Masters Worlds is still coming. You look at some of the guys in my division, they're beasts. And I don't know how it's going to go for me. Just like I don't know how any competition is going to go for me. But I'm going to show up for it. But there's this idea that persists that the real fight has yet to come. And I'm thinking a lot about something Josh often says, which is that you can't crave this release of the tension. You know, the team in the championship bid that wants out of the tension, that's the team that's going to break, and that's the team that's going to lose. And it feels like the tension has broken for me. But I think there's a distinction there to be explored, which we'll get into later in the episode. But for now, suffice it to say, I think my body is healing, and there's no telling what my son may bring home at any moment. The crazy thing is that other than being underweight at this point, there's really no after effects of the GI virus. But man, this lung shit with the bronchitis still lingering, still coughing up stuff, and that's generally the way these things go for me. The upper respiratory tract infections tend to be long haul type things. So I don't know how long this is going to be sticking around. There's also a lot of COVID going around right now. No one in my school has had it, to my knowledge. But I know my mother-in-law recently came down with it. And I'm just kind of thinking like, well, am I going to have COVID? I'm pretty sure I might have had COVID in the run-up to Worlds last year. Try to dodge that bullet, but there's only so much you can do there. But yeah, this Sunday morning, we had our usual comp class led by our head coach, Shane McCarthy. And he structured things in a great way. He had everybody warm up as if they were getting ready for their first round in competition, and you didn't have any space to really warm up. As you may know, these IBJJF comps are really hit or miss in terms of the warm-up area. Sometimes they'll give you a nice mat area where you can roll a bit, get loose. Other times, like at the New York Open, you may have a stretch of gymnasium floor that's available to you with no mats, so you kind of have to warm up appropriately, not really doing jiu-jitsu, maybe doing more calisthenics. And then other times you're just in a broom closet somewhere and really all you can do is pogo up and down. So you have to make do with what's available to you. And that was the nature of this exercise. It was, okay, we're going to make do with the space we have available, pretend all you have is a little bit of room to move around, get loose. And then immediately he launched us into some quick foot drills with sprawls just to get everybody's heart rate up really high. Sprawl into like a burpee style jump up. And what he was trying to recreate, and I think brilliantly, is that adrenaline dump and that cardio rush that you get in your first match in a competition where you're dealing with an equally skilled opponent who's equally fresh. I don't know about you guys, but I find myself, when I feel my heart rate start to get elevated to that point, to resist it, maybe even to hold my breath a little bit. And that makes it worse naturally. So it was a good exercise to just get into that zone, knowing that the real fight was going to come immediately afterward. And I felt great pushing through it because I knew exactly what he was doing. In my little reptilian brain, I was thinking, yeah, this is a great exercise. I'm so stoked to be doing this, even as my body was on fire. And I just proceeded to tear it up for the rest of that competition class, for the rest of that 55 minutes. Everything was working as it should. Brain and body finally felt like they were on the same page again. So it was nice to feel like feel like I'm a capable grappler once again. Hopefully that sticks around for a while. But anyway, I lost in New York, which I talked about last week. And historically speaking, on the battlefield, losses are often followed up by retreats. And in some ways, I feel like I'm in retreat right now. It's an inward retreat. And I think retreat has negative connotations, obviously, because it's associated with defeat. But there are good ways and there are bad ways to retreat. And right now, I feel more like I'm on a strategic retreat, meaning I'm remembering, like I'm regathering myself. This experience of being sick, competing, broke me apart in a lot of ways, and those parts are being pulled back together, both on a psychological and a physiological level. So that's kind of what I want to talk about right now. And when I think of retreating, I tend to think of it almost in the spiritual sense. I was saying to my dear friend Pat in the aftermath of the competition, what I really crave right now is to just go into a cave for a week and to be left alone and to just have time to think in negative space. And historically for me, this is where the creative magic happens. I need that negative space and that restricted stimuli in order to produce things that are meaningful. And I don't see any reason why my jiu-jitsu shouldn't be any different, because as I've said on previous episodes of this podcast, I relate to jiu-jitsu first and foremost as a creative outlet, a creative expression. And when I'm forced into extended periods of output, like I am in this big competitive stretch right now, I tend to feel like the well can run dry. So what I'm really craving is some time in the cave to let the well replenish and to let that creative magic happen. It's almost like I've been out in the world for too long. And the way I relate to this is similarly to how I used to feel back in the day when I was playing in punk bands. We would play a show on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and I would just pour everything I had into it. I would come home barely able to speak. My voice would be gone, and I would be physically exhausted, but also unable to sleep, and just wired up from putting myself through this experience, because it wasn't just like I was going up on a stage and playing bass or playing guitar and singing some songs. It was a performance in which I was reliving everything and that had happened, that had transpired to inform those songs. It was like experiencing all that anew. And I needed time to reset after that. And it's no different for me with jiu-jitsu. I'm going out, and every time I compete, I'm experiencing all of the psychology that accompanies competitions, past, present, and future. It's like it's all converging at once in this stupid organism called Joe. And it's an overwhelming experience. And I want to just hole up, and I can't. And as I said to my dear friend Pat, I want to hole up right now, and all I have to do, and what I have to do tomorrow is host my son's third birthday party. It's a horrible thing to say, but, and it ended up being an amazing party. And Cormac had a fantastic time. But man, like I was just so physically run down and mentally run down in the run up to it. But that's what we sign up for as parents. And I share this not to beat myself up too much publicly, but just to say this is the nature of being an amateur athlete. And I say athlete quite intentionally. I've been really enjoying Andy Galpin's podcast called Perform. Lots of good lessons there for those of you who are interested in maximizing your performance in this sport or others. But he often cites this quote, I forget from which physiologist, but this person says that if you have a body, you are an athlete. So here you are listening to this podcast. Presumably you do jiu-jitsu or some other athletic pursuit. You are an athlete, but you happen to be most likely, like me, an athlete with real time constraints, real emotional capacity constraints, real attention capacity constraints, owing to the fact that perhaps you have a significant other, perhaps you have a job, perhaps you have a child or children. And at the same time, you have chosen to willingly take on this martial art. Perhaps you've willingly chosen to take on competitive martial arts. It's a lot to balance. And you have to balance it because your kid is still going to have an amazing third birthday, right? Your spouse is still going to crave your attention and you're going to crave theirs, right? It's this constant juggling act that we're all trying to do. And sometimes we have better success than others. And this is sort of what I was relating to my friend Pat when I was describing this. So yeah, there's this constant pull to be in performance mode, this outward form of expression. And there's a countervailing pull to go inward, for me anyway. I don't know about you, because ultimately that inward journey is what fuels and inspires this outward journey. And this is all fucking complicated by the fact that I have a weekly podcast. You know, I was, this is, I don't want to say it's the last thing I want to do right now, because there are certainly things that I would prefer to do this over other things, I should say. But there was some real hand-wringing and pain going into the prep for this episode, as minimal as it is, of what I'm going to talk about. And ultimately I decided, well, let me just talk about this tension, because other people might be feeling it too. This tension between retreating and sort of putting yourself out there. So here I am, honoring my commitment to you and putting myself out there and kind of letting it all hang out like I always do. But yeah, every ounce of who I am, what I've done, and who I want to be goes into competing. And so you couple that with the emotional gravity of losing. And it's tough. It's tough to process, and it's tough to keep showing up and putting yourself out there in the world. And I want to talk about that last bit, especially the emotional gravity of losing. I think you could certainly become skilled at losing. I think that's a subject for a podcast, or perhaps a series that I'll do somewhere down the road, how to lose well. But the emotional gravity of loss never goes away. I don't think competitors truly get over that. Serious athletes, serious competitors truly get over that. I think you learn to sit with it, to be present with it, and to pay attention to it. If you don't feel that emotional gravity of loss, of defeat, then in my mind, you probably weren't taking the competition seriously enough. You didn't put yourself enough into it. And I think that's a defense mechanism that a lot of us have, where we will distance ourselves, meaning our being, our true self, capital S self. We will distance ourselves from the outcome of this thing. It's almost like we're watching somebody else doing it, you know, but really it's us. And if we're not showing up as a full unified being to that thing, we're not performing at our best. And that's ultimately our goal here, is to perform at our best. Right. I think a lot of us kind of go to that defense mechanism, but when you fully embrace it, the pain of defeat is exquisitely sharp, and it lingers. I still feel it, but I'm able to distance myself from it a little bit more. And it's interesting. I think what's interesting about this current experience, relating it back to this point of tension I'm feeling at the top of the episode, with the tension has broken. Is that right or wrong? Am I craving a release from the tension? It's amazing how just being well enough to go back to my grueling training routine feels comforting to me. It feels good to feel so bad, because I've become so accustomed to it, because my training has prepared me for it. I crave that routine. I crave that rhythm of stress and recovery. It's like, oh, it's just another murderous day in the trenches. No big deal. Business as usual. That feels good to me. So I'm not so sure that I'm craving a release from this tension. I don't really think that's it at all. The tension may have broken. It may feel less acute, but I still see it. I still feel it. I think I've just kind of gotten a bit better at sitting with it. And I think that's an important development in my journey to hopefully one day winning a world championship. As I said earlier, previous episode, it might not happen. But this ability to feel defeat, see it, learn from it, and to get up and keep going, and to hold on to the emotional weight that comes along with it, but not in such a way where it's burdensome, in a way that it's constructive, in a way that it's educational. my mind, that's what this journey is all about. So that's what I'm going to take with me into the remainder of my week of training here. There's no telling what will shake loose in the days ahead on the mat and what might show up in future episodes of this podcast, but that's what's here right now. As usual, thank you very much for listening. If there's anything you ever want to hear me talk about on an episode, if you have questions you'd like me to answer on an episode, you can always email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Instagram. Personal account is jhannan, Hannan 86, and the BJJ Meditations account is BJJ _ meditations, both on Instagram. Thank you very much for listening, folks, and we will talk next week.